While I finish the script to part 3 of the Christian case of persecution in China, I'll do a side video. This be like a 1 or 2 part side thing if need be. Not as hardcore as the other one, but it's just more of an interesting note and something which is also quite a serious manner because this concern is really serious in the grand scheme of things, as invisible disability is actual generally serious. You can't overlook it at all. Anosmia is classified here just for technicality reasons, just to show everything. All human beings communicate as animals through sight, sound, touch, and taste and smell. To not have any of these senses is to be considered disabled. Each of these disabilities is considered a communication disorder. So there you go. It's probably more technically that a communication disorder. Where it says, as for definition, anosmia can be partial or complete. Although a complete loss of smell is fairly rare, loss of smell can also be temporary or permanent depending on cause. When the loss of smell is partial, the condition is called hyposmia. Some people are anosmic for one partial odor called specific anosmia, although the loss of smell can sometimes be a symptom of a serious condition. It isn't necessarily serious. Still, an intact sense of smell is necessary to taste foods fully. Loss of smell could have reduced interest in eating, leading to weight loss, malnutrition, or even depression. Anosmia often seems to those who have systems in working order to be the easiest communication disorder to live with. Yet ask anyone who had their sense of smell taken away from them, and you'll find the sense is seriously underrated and taken for granted. The core thing here is invisible disabilities. It's defined as invisible disability or hidden disability is an umbrella term that captures the whole spectrum of hidden disabilities or challenges, primarily neurological. Invisible disabilities or hidden disabilities are defined as disabilities that are not immediately present to some people with visual or auditory disabilities who do not wear glasses or hearing aids or discrete hearing aids may not be obviously disabled. Some who have vision loss may wear contacts. A sitting disability is another category of invisible impairment. Chronic back pain usually causes sitting problems. Those with joint issues or chronic pain may not use mobility aids, may in some days. Although the disability creates a challenge for the person who has it, the reality of the disability can be difficult for others to recognise and acknowledge. Others may not understand the cause of the difficulty if they cannot see the evidence of it. To expand on this, in 2015, this was also said. Disability can come in many different forms. People who are familiar with a visible disability. A neighbour down the street who uses a wheelchair, or a friend who has a good guide dog. But what about someone with a disability that's not visible? Loosely defined, is a disability that is not immediately noticeable. They can include brain injuries, chronic pain, mental illness, gastrointestinal disorders, and much more. Because they're not obvious to spot, invisible disabilities may be overlooked and misunderstood. And unfortunately, this can lead to discrimination or exclusion of those with a invisible disability. One thing to understand, though, critical about this is that anosmia isn't unnatural. It's actually perfectly natural. But just because you don't see it often in young people doesn't mean it's unnatural. Anosmia itself is a natural process. It will happen to most of us anyway. Like it or not, you will get anosmia eventually at some point in your life, whether young, from birth, or otherwise. Does it necessarily matter? No. You'll probably get it some way or another. As is said here, and as you can read, after 60 is when it starts kicking in much more. There's also some measures in which, say, 40 as well is a trigger point that you can get it. Because 40 to 50 is the age where a lot of genetic diseases can kick in, and that's probably where anosmia could start kicking in as well. But the point is to say, 60 to 85 is where it starts getting really more common to have anosmia. And then at 60 to 85, if your sense of smell is perfectly intact, you are an anomaly at that point. So realistically, just in your own young friend groups. You may not know anyone who has anosmia, but most likely your grandparents have a form of anosmia. The fine point in this source, I think, that needs to be mentioned here is that loss of taste and smell can have a significant impact on quality of life. If one needs to decrease appetite and poor nutrition, it can sometimes contribute to depression. Also, taste can also might tempt you to use excess salt or sugar on your food to enhance the taste. This could be a problem if you have high blood pressure or diabetes. To this, I'd say, and that's with my some personal experiences. Now, all definitions are set. As for depression, yes, it did lead to increased depression. As for appetite, yes and no. My appetite hasn't changed that significantly, but what has changed is the enjoyment of food in the first place. Certain foods I don't get any enjoyment out of. I eat often now because I have to eat because of nourishment for the body. Otherwise, there's no point in me eating. As for the comment about excess salt or sugar, I guess like in cakes and stuff like that, and biscuits, and could be classified under that. Which I do actually now adore biscuits because it's probably one of the few things which has enough value in flavor for me. The biggest issue, though, I think, as was said here, is actually quite interesting. Was doing a light comment about in my personal conduct. Well, yes, some they lose weight, but for others they gain weight as well. For example, the World Economic Forum, at least for this talking about COVID-19, that is for others things smell fluid, and anosmia could be taken to parosmia, food that could be fine one day could be disgusting next. This chaos narrative, as sociologists call it, meant that smell loss was very difficult to live with, let alone manage, a condition over which there was no control. The effect on appetite was also unpredictable, as might be expected. People have trouble eating, particularly when normal smells were distorted, and if they're gone completely, it's even harder eating some things. Some were really struggling, reporting malnutrition and severe weight loss. That I can definitely see happening as well. Less obvious, some people reported weight gain. Those with anosmia who were chasing flavour after losing sense of smell. You can understand this if you realise the distinction between wanting and liking in what psychologists call the pleasure cycle. Wanting is where you're chasing the thing you like to consume. That, for example, can be anything you want in food. I'm not going to judge. Liking is when you got it and you're savouring it. In anosmia, that savouring part is no longer there, but it doesn't stop the wanting. And I'm actually in the part there where I do seek some form of flavour. I look for it. It often never happens, but I go way too extreme in manners to get any flavour. In which some could say is butchering balance completely just to get anything out of it. That isn't just nothing. So this was an interesting comment. Above that, it said this. By speaking to people in this group, it was talking about a group they made, about people who suffered anosmia through COVID-19, we were able to build a picture of the wider impacts of disrupted smell following COVID-19 at the time of conducting research. We started posting questions, got a better sense of what's going on, and the response was overwhelming. People wanted their experiences to be heard, burning themes, yada yada yada. We wanted to be sure there are things on what we found, and this is where the comment is where the commonality between COVID-19 anosmia and regular anosmia is here. Ending our food satisfaction as a whole. So this is where later I'll be talking about COVID-19 anosmia versus acquired anosmia or other forms of anosmia. For example, this segment from 2017 is normal. 72, starting to lose sense of smell and getting anosmic features. That's fairly normal and within what is recorded the most common range between the 60 and 85 range. For example, as I said here, this is just a good proving here is that anosmia can hit you early or late. It's all because the brain and body degrades, changes, warps. So basically, some form of anosmic response is to be expected. As for anosmia itself, there isn't this one kind. By technicality, there's multiple kinds. There's only two by technicality: congenital and acquired. I honestly can't remember which one I am specifically. Don't ask me which one I am. My memory of early life is terrible. I can't remember any of it. Um, Here we go. I'll highlight this section here just so those watching can see. Congenital anosmia is a condition in which people are born with lifelong inability to smell. It may occur as an isolated abnormality, no symptoms, and associated with specific genetic disorders such as yada yada. You can read it yourself. Isolated congenital anosmia might occur in people who do not have a family history of the disease, although some familial cases have been reported. In most cases of isolated congenital anosmia, the genetic code is unknown. So this is the most basic form of anosmia, which is you're basically born with it. To be my point I said earlier, this is a good example. Symptoms of anosmia can occur at any time. And that is a really interesting thing about it. Much like any other invisible disability, it can occur before birth, newborn, infant, child, adolescent, adult, or older. And as the source said, symptoms may start to appear as newborns and infants. So some people could just never have the ability completely. And that's where I think the whole issue for some may kick in. Because some people smell perfectly fine. Some people have no invisible disabilities and everything works perfectly fine. Some people might have like everything else working fine, except for like one thing, which is what some might have here. Because as it said here, the most common ages for symptoms of a disease to begin is called an age of onset. Age of onset can vary for different diseases and may be used by doctors to determine the diagnosis. For some diseases, symptoms may begin to appear at a single age range or several age ranges. For other diseases, symptoms may appear at any time during a person's life, with focus on at any time. And that's especially more so with anosmia, because anosmia can be triggered by many, many things. As you know, COVID-19 can cause it. Diseases, inflammation, but so can injuries, surgeries. Not even having any overt diseases or injuries, you can still get it. It's just one of those things which can happen to you regardless, and it causes such a major implication. The reason why everything I said so far is important is that treatment, therefore, of anosmia is very varying on how you got it. If you don't know how you got it specifically, treatment, therefore, can be very, very difficult. And there's basically no point having false hope over a treatment. Much like genetic diseases, anosmia is one of them. Also, at the same time, people can get genetic diabetes as well. Yes, that's an actual thing, by the way. People can be living a perfectly healthy life, then boom, get 50, get diabetes, regardless of life choices, and then they have to suck it up. Genetic diseases are just cruel like that. This happen. Basically, yeah, this is where the fine point of this really comes into play. Because if you get like acquired anosmia, you can recover from it much, much faster, potentially, because there's scientific in it too. But if you've got genetic anosmia, you'll most likely never get it back, because you never had it in the first place. So that's basically why the discussion around anosmia needs to be understood properly. And that's why the question shouldn't be asked, are you doing X or Y, and to do it, resolve it. But the question should be, is it a genetic application, or was it acquired? And that is where something that needs to be really focused on if you are going to talk to people who have anosmia. Because people who have anosmia vary a lot in how they got it. Some don't know, some know. So first, ask if you know if you have anosmia, if you know where they got it from first. Second, if they don't know, if they don't know, there's no point continuing it about the line of inquiry of treatment necessarily, because then it's all experimental with treatment. there's no guarantee for anything. If they do know, for example, let's say they had like a car accident, surgery fuck up, or let's say, as what's on screen, right? Genetic form of it, then the direction you can take is very, very different. Another aspect which is very important here is economics. Much like anything, economics impacts everything. If you're poor or rich, you can get different standards of things. The issue with anosmia is this. Anosmia itself is kind of annoying. The likelihood of public healthcare or universal healthcare even helping you in cases of anosmia is basically redundant. A GP might diagnose you, give you a referral that you have anosmia. That's important because you need that for next step. But next step is, regardless of your actual status, you need to go to private healthcare. This is where which families, if they have like backup private healthcare plans and ability to pay on hand for like appointments that cost hundreds each visit, then yes, they can do something about it. But if you're lower, as you're seeing on screen, where it says the high income population showed about 1.4 folds higher incidence rates than the low income population. We thought that the socio-economic status could generally affect the rate of hospital visits in the anosmia population. Anosmia can be frequently underdiagnosed in the clinical environment because the elderly and low-income poor people easily underestimates their anosmic symptoms and ignore the severity due to the economic problems. Therefore, careful attention and further studies for anosmia is needed. And as you saw, this is a thing of talking about South Korea. It was done in 2020 for those curious. Abstract. The study also says something good. This is a smell that chemically detects odorants in the air. Perhaps the most crucial function of location is the early warning system for the detection of fire, leaking of natural gas, contaminated air, and spoiled food. That is really critical because essentially, anosmia then itself is no longer just a simple thing. It's a case of, well, if you can't smell properly and your systems are all bundled up and not functioning well, you're done for, basically. And the likelihood of food poisoning or other stuff can factor in. So, like foods, for example, which don't visibly show that they're off or not good, is nightmares, basically, because then you can't know if it's actually reliable to use or not. That's why there's articles like this, from like 2014, in which it says, essentially, is saying foreboding of death. Here we go. This part here is actually fine to most part, but the core point is the whole sentiment about then likelihood of life and death, in which has been talked about by some better, some worse, some just weirdly, but still, that's probably there is that word of it. To give further expansion to the whole life expectancy thing, let's look at this. For some of this comment here. Doesn't limit longevity so per se, but not being able to detect something is major. Fire chemicals and other dangers people are able to detect warnings, but that's those we don't have, basically. So that basically says here by to come by Kerry, technically true, that by itself it doesn't change life expectancy, but at the same time, the inability is actually quite annoying. On occasion, it can be a bit annoying. And on a side note, I actually have had a time where I didn't detect fire or smoke or something, and it was only next door in a small unit, and I just couldn't detect it at all. It got resolved, but it was a bit scary. Basically, what happened was I just went in there, had to figure out what's going on. Only as smoke got into my room. Only from there could I actually act on it and deal with it. This website, which I'll link like everything else below, says something really interesting as well. It's got accounts which I recommend you read. At least this one. It's got accounts of stuff. This one's a common case though for people who have anosmia since birth. I realised that this is terrible to sense the smell, but I didn't have one, so I never missed it. And that's what other studies found: is that people who had smell lost it and got anosmia, then missed it, and the trend tends to be that people who always had perfect smell or close enough to perfect smell never worried about that much. I didn't even realize there was an issue that wasn't sensing into high school. Since leaving college, now that I'm living independently, I started to smell a few things, which in this case, sure, they are recovering slightly, and that can happen, an actual recovery, but it's not guaranteed. The first few times I smelled something was overwhelming and impossible to process. It was like getting slapped in the face and trying to substance, basically. Still, I can count the things I can smell on the hand, and my smell's not reliable. And that's the thing also about this is that this relates to COVID-19 anosmia. Yes, some have actually recovered quite quickly in general from anosmia, but there has also been cases of a distortion as well within the future. How, for time or basically extended period after, there was a distortion of taste and so on and so on. And the point here towards the end is that, in that sense, congenital anosmia is very different from acquired anosmia. I wish I could smell harmful odors, and I wish I could smell when I have body odor, but otherwise I'm happy, enjoy food, and do not feel deprived. Which ends up happening anyway with anosmia, because you learn you can and cannot eat and do. You get your own things you can and cannot do. You get your own new enjoyments and what you don't enjoy. And you just eat different things. For example, myself, Indian, Thai, and Chinese food. That's basically something I can eat without anosmia screwing it up. Can I enjoy those foods? Absolutely yes. So, while a lot of this may seem doom and gloom, which in some cases it is, because the obvious implication of being unable to smell dangers around you, some things when you actually have long-term anosmia, you just get used to it. You just work around it, change things, so on, and then you get a new normal. Yeah, as for the accounts, look at the diversity of the accounts in themselves, right? That's probably these is probably meant just going over some highlights. Let's just try and highlight some of these here, right? Bicycle crash, head injury, okay. Congenital since birth. That's one I read since birth. Brain injury. This is basically something in which I think you should look at if you want to actually understand what people going through anosmia actually do feel. And of course, there's ones like this on this site with accounts, which is actually kind of more funny. I'm now much older, and only my closest friends know about it. Anosmia. The main reason for telling them is during the summer I had no idea how badly or not my sweat is affecting the air. In that, I actually have accounts of that as well. Is that I forgot what I was doing, but there was a case where my body odor was very bad. I forgot to shower or something, and because I can't smell, I couldn't detect any of the body odor. So I was pulled aside and just told about it. And it was the same sort of situation. I had to tell the person, and literally, yeah, continuing. So I asked them to be honest with me. Yeah, as did I. I just tell people to be honest with me regarding body odor or hygiene. not in clothing because you have to. Because if you don't, there's a high chance it's not going to be suitable. Initially, they feel awkward telling me I stink, but it seems rude to them. That seems rude to them. Yes, that's true. People don't like saying they stink. People don't like doing that much. That's correct. So I use a strategy. Would like to know, let a blind man walk into a wall? No, right? So basically, same situation with me. So just tell me. It's important that I know if I need to change my shirt or should go take another shower. Yeah, same situation for me, honestly. That's why family and like close friends I'm around, just tell me. There's no point trying to hide out courtesy, because your courtesy is useless to me in that respect. Because, yeah. To finish off, I'll be. To finish off, I will say this. At the end of the day, invisible disabilities are there, and they can affect lives in many, many ways. I might do a part two to go over some more personal examples, as I can know that the length so far is already getting up there, so I won't bore you with anything else. So, the core point I want to mention here ultimately is that anosmia itself isn't going to be like a contagious thing. It's something that happens to all of us eventually at some point. It happens early or late. It can recover or not recover. Some people never recover. Some people is basically a minimal recovery, and that's it. All I'm saying is, awareness of such things is just essential in some cases if it's like a serious implication in their lives. And I hope it was an interesting snapshot into something you might or might not have heard of to such a depth. And I'll continue writing my script for part 3. Thank you